This episode is brought to you by Columbia Sportswear. It's snowing again, and that wind chill is killer. But you're not worried about that because you shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection. It's warmth perfected with tiny gold dots that reflect your body heat inside and protect you from the cold outside. No snow or chilly temps can stop you now. Go out anyway. Shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection now at Columbia.com/infinity.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
Serie A Chronicles is a Media Chronicles production.
Now, before we start our chat, we want you to head over to serieachronicles.com/Patreon now and subscribe to the Chronicles Tifosi membership with a free 7-day trial. Get priority access to every episode and voice note before the rest of the world. Plus, no ads and bonus Patreon-only exclusive episodes and video episodes. Also, be sure to join the new chat community in the Patreon app and chat with fellow subscribers. Hello and welcome to the Serie A Chronicles podcast. I'm Mina Rizuki and I'll be your host for this evening. It just sounds so formal, doesn't it? Like I'm hosting a little game show. Yes, Wheel of Fortune. What letter do you want? As always, that laugh belongs to no one other than Nikki Bandini. Welcome. How was New York?
Oh, it was so good. I had a great time in New York. I'm such a sucker for it. I don't know, I actually, for a long time, I really wasn't sure about New York because I'd only ever sort of been there passing through. I'd always been there for a night on the way somewhere rather than actually sort of spending time there. But I've gone twice in the last couple of years and I like it. It's such a cheesy thing to like. It's so obvious to like New York. Oh, big impressive New York. But you go there and it's walkable, actually, in a way that I didn't realize it would be. You can just really walk all over the place. You don't even need to get on the subway. And it's so, I don't know, stuff happening everywhere. It makes you feel energized and swept up in it. Or it does me anyway.
Yes, it does. New York is a lot of fun to go to. I just wish that I didn't have such a problem with the food. I always end up getting sick. So I don't know what's going on there. No. I know. I feel like, how a lot of the time Americans say that they gluten intolerant and I'm just I just don't know if the quality of the food is the same as in Europe because every time I go there, I just feel like I get food poisoning. So anyway.
That may be a thing. I thought you were going to say, my problem with the food is how flipping much it costs. First day I was there, I got a bagel with some cream cheese and lox, as they call. I'm not sure the difference between lox and smoked salmon, but to me it seems like a smoked salmon bagel.
Yeah,
and that was, that was $15, and I was like,
what?
Oh, okay, yes, yeah,
was it?
Yeah. So, yes, money in New York was a bit of a shock. I mean, everywhere's got more expensive, right? England's got more expensive, Italy's got more expensive, but I did feel like this time when I went to America, having not been for a hot minute, I guess, I was a bit shocked by how much everything cost.
Someone was saying that a coffee is $7 to $8, and I was like, for a coffee? I don't understand.
In some places, yeah. Right. I'll tell you that the worst example of this actually that I saw really was awful. So someone was watching my dog while I was away and I wanted to say thank you to them. So this is in the airport and I appreciate airport prices are always a bit different. They're always a bit higher, but it's in JFK airport. I just was like, I'll get them some American candy. So I got them some peanut butter M&Ms, delicious peanut butter M&Ms. And they come like a share bag, right? And, a share bag in England, maybe in your local shop, it's going to be like £2. Maybe in the airport, it might be £3 or £4. I didn't even realize I got to count this bag of M&Ms. It's a big bag, but it's still just a bag of M&Ms. Was $12.
No.
That's a 10 quid basically for a bag of M&Ms. So yeah, I was a bit horrified by some of the things that were priced up there. So I do like New York, but I don't like what it looks like on my bank balance afterwards.
You know, like, as in whenever I speak to Americans, or they always say to me, you know, like, for example, I was in Monaco in the summer and they're like, oh, it's so expensive. And I'm like, not really. I could go for a full meal in Monaco and want a really nice restaurant and it's cheaper than the States, you know? Well, it's cheaper than New York. I don't know if it's obviously cheaper than like...
New York is New York.
Yeah.
So...
But it is expensive. Having said that, though, then I sometimes, when I would go to a really nice restaurant with like Via Carota, which is this really nice Italian, actually, I think it's cheaper than England if you go to a nice restaurant. But your regular life, like a coffee or that stuff, is a lot more expensive. And shopping is, like, if you want to buy a chicken and roast it in your oven, it's really expensive. So anyway, we're going to stop talking about this now because there's been a lot going on in football. So we were talking about this before, and Nikki was saying that if she was hosting the show, she would have made sure that she said it was Pioli in and Pioli out, rather, and now it's Pioli in. So I'm stealing that from her because it's true. Milan potentially had their worst performance of the season over the weekend when they lost to Udinese. Udinese obviously under new management, under Cioffi, who's come back and somewhat brought this team or dragged this team out of the well of despair. And everyone had lots of questions. The fans were booing them. It was, what's going on with this Milan? Is it a case of now they've, you know, Pioli's time at Milan has run its course. Maybe they need a shock to the system, somebody that can really bring this team out. Others were talking about the fact that they have lost their leadership, whether it be Paolo Maldini in a director role, whether it be Sandro Tonali in the middle of the pitch, or whether it be their leader in Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Should he be coming back? Well, the answer is that he probably is going to be coming back. He is in negotiations with management at the moment. And Pioli, the pressure was mounting. The last thing Milan needed was a game against Kylian Mbappe and PSG. But you know what? It sounds like it was the best thing they needed because they pulled out the best performance of the season. And I don't know. I mean, they were brilliant. But PSG also, there's just this part of you just thinks to yourself, is this team ever going to be good? Like, are they ever going to be a team that are actually consistently good? But it's not about them. It's about Milan. It's about the great defending. It's about the collective unity of the team. It's about Rafael Leao and a bicycle kick and going back and tracking and helping the team defensively. And it was about Loftus-Cheek, Nikki.
Yeah. I mean, I have this in my head with the Pioli in, Pioli out. It's like, to me, it sounds like the Hokey Cokey. You put the Pioli in, take Pioli out, and then Milan in the Champions League shake it all about because they've tipped this group upside down by beating PSG, didn't they? And I agree with you completely about the key figures in this game. Rafael Leao. It's not just the overhead kick. It's the pass to set up the move in the first place. The sort of the reverse ball out to Giroud is brilliant, and I think completely took the defense out of it. It gave Giroud so much space to bear down on the near side of the goal, which of course the shot is well saved from Donnarumma. And then the follow up, I think it's actually exactly what people have perhaps criticised Leao for not showing us enough. At times, I think it's certainly something that Pioli has hinted at getting frustrated with Leao about, feeling that he doesn't always give you 100% commitment. But that goal was 100% commitment. That was not only sort of being sort of, I guess, focused enough to follow up the pass and make that run to the box so you're ready if something does happen. But then that sort of unwillingness when the ball's actually sort of bouncing out to a slightly awkward spot, that unwillingness to let it go. So you realize you can't quite shoot in a normal way. So you twist yourself around and you make sure you get a shot on it with that overhead kick. It was brilliant. And the sort of forever frustrating thing with Leao is it feels like he should be doing this more. It feels like he should be doing this all the time, and he doesn't. But when he does it, you go, God, yes, he really can be one of the best players in the world if he does this more. But that was brilliant. And then I think exactly as you were just saying, Mina, the other one is just Ruben Loftus-Cheek. Because I think that the difference it made to Milan's dynamism, to the way they brought the ball out of midfield, so significant. And I think that comes with an accompanying question for me, which is about formations. And I've been critical of Pioli sometimes for not always having a plan B. And I think that still rings true in some situations, in some games. But then against Udinese, he did change things. He went to a 4-4-2, and I hated it. I hated it. That the whole sort of shape of it felt wrong. You had Leao pushed out too far away from goal where he does his best work. You had Jovic treading on Giroud's toes and being terrible. You had Milan losing to Udinese, who are dreadful, or have been dreadful in any case up to now. So sometimes change for change's sake is not always right. And I was listening to another podcast, an Italian language podcast by the Ultimo Uomo, where they were doing a sort of Pioli in versus Pioli out debate, as it were. And one of the guys on there was saying, when you see a manager go to 4-4-2, that's like your signal that we've reached the end of the era, because that's what managers fall back on when they're out of ideas. They go, oh God, let's just do 4-4-2. But I don't know. I'm not sure I'm convinced that this era is quite over yet.
So this is where it gets really interesting if someone has to ask you, like, with a gun to your head, what you think of Milan, or what, you know, what their ceiling is. It must be really hard for Stefano Pioli when he had a certain number of players that he had his faith in, like he believed in Tonali, he believed in Bennacer. Obviously, these were the guys that he relied on for a long time. And he had like his leaders. He had the directors who were close to him, and he had players where he knew where his reference points was. At the start of all of it, when he first came along, and obviously they suffered like that huge loss to Atalanta, they did have the benefit of, I mean, it's not really a benefit, but obviously the pandemic meant that he had a lot more time to sort of spend with his players and talk to them over the phone, and I understand what it is he wants to do. One thing I do love about him is that he experiments. I think experimentation is really important. The problem is that we hate that in Italy because we're very results focused. So we want to see instant impact, instant glory straight away. And he's got a largely new team that I don't think it's spoken enough about, because I hated the way that they did it with Juventus last year, where it's like the team was like dreadfully low on just personnel, and there were so many absences, and I was like, oh my God, you don't need Federico Chiesa and Vlahovic to win against, you know, I don't know, insert worst team in the world, Lecce, you know. But he has been without a lot of the players that were supposed to ensure that they're not dependent on Leao, whether that was Chukwueze, whether that was Pulisic, or whether it was Loftus-Cheek, who's not just, you know, a player who's very intelligent, but also physically necessary to the side in general. And it also allows Yunus Musa to be a lot better in his role too. It's sort of just, it's like the balance of the three just becomes a lot better, because Reinders can be his dynamic creative self without worried all the time. Then you have the physicality and the intellect of Loftus-Cheek to get the ball out. And then you have Musa, who's again just brilliant in this match as well. And I do think that he hasn't really had that to rely on, and he's trying to figure out ways. Yes, the 4-4-2 has been terrible, but I'm glad that he's trying to figure it out. I don't think that it's fair to say to them, you have to win this season, you have to be this amazing this season. They do need to make top four, but I think that if they experiment enough this year, then actually they could be really brilliant next year. And that is sort of where I'm hanging my hat on. I'm not going to judge him for the season, because I think it's so many new players for him. It's so many new players. And I think asking them to do so well instantly, I found it really hard for me to be horrible to him about it. And they were very naive, and they deserve criticism for their performances in the derby. They deserve criticism for their performance against PSG, you know, in the reverse fixture. But I also think that this is building to something exciting. And just to take an example of this, like Spurs, like they were saying, you know, you've gone down to 9 men, like just defend with all your life. And I was like, and he said, no, that's just not our character. Postecoglou was saying, it's not our character. He'd rather take the hit and ensure that his players know what their job is and what their duty is, which is always to express his ideology, that philosophy of gameplay. And I think that's kind of a little bit what Pioli's doing. So it's going to result in some mad defeats, right? But you guys love it from De Zerbi, so I think that we should accept it from Pioli too.
I think I'm maybe a little bit less generous than you, I guess. Then because
I know.
I think like. So I'm really with I guess our former podcasting buddy Matteo Bonetti. I saw on Twitter saying the other day saying like he was sort of having a bit of a fight with people on his Twitter timeline about it, like about what this is time to get rid of Pioli, and he was saying, do you really believe that if you replace him mid-season you're going to get something better? And he was doing this, I can't remember if it was after the PSG game, after the Udinese game. It was before the win over PSG.
Okay.
So maybe after the other one. But he was, saying, do you really think that replacing him mid-season is going to lead to a better outcome this season? And I'm totally with him on that. I think that replacing mid-season you're not going to magic up some available manager who's going to do a better job, unless you're specifically thinking that you just desperately want Antonio Conte to come in there and
defend,
sap away any sort of spirit of fun that might be in this team. In which case, maybe Conte could come in and grind sort of to a top 4 spot in a more comfortable way. That I suppose is the one plausible scenario to me. But what do you give up for it? You're always selling your soul a little bit when you hire Conte. You're going to be making the situation of we'll build for 2 years, then he'll go off in a strop and things will probably not be brilliant when he leaves them. But I think if that's the mindset, which is my mindset, is you're not going to do better by replacing him mid-season, then I think there's no point really getting too worked up about it either way for now. Now, if by the end of this season, if I feel like he's not made it look more coherent, hasn't made it look more stable, hasn't eradicated some of this sort of split personality team that we're seeing that can lose to Udinese before beating PSG, then I think that's the point at which you can draw judgments. You'll have had these players for a season. So I don't think you necessarily have to sort of think, well, we're defending him forever. But I definitely don't see any reason for this conversation to be gaining that much traction right now.
Yeah.
Unless you're getting towards, I suppose maybe if you're getting to February, March, and you're really like looking at missing out on the top 4, you might get desperate. But they're third, Mina. They're not actually like hanging away miles off. They're just not going to catch Inter. And you know what? That's because Inter are better than them.
Max, the one to watch. For epic original series. Blockbuster movies.
Hi, Barbie!
Hi, Ken!
Plus,
we have breaking news.
24/7 live streaming news with CNN Max. And live sports with hundreds of games from the NBA, MLB, NHL, NCAA Men's March Madness, and U.S. National Soccer. All included for a limited time with Bleacher Report Sports add-on. After the promo period, add Bleacher Report Sports starting at $9.99 a month. Not all titles currently available.
Yeah, but this is where like logic has to come into this. Like you can't ask this team to be better than Inter. Inter also has... look, a lot of people were worried at the start of the season. I'm being one of them. I did a podcast with James Horncastle who was saying, I'm really afraid of like how this team is being run. There was a lot of Inter fans who were doing their own podcasts who came and saying like that I'm worried about the fact that we're just buying players that fit in, and rather than having a clear, cohesive idea of what it is or how we're going to build for the future, because the team keeps looking like it's weaker than the one before it. But in essence, what they do have is that maybe they might have weakened in the sense that they've lost, stalwarts in the past. But what they've also gained is players within the team growing into champions, like a Barella, like and especially Lautaro Martinez, right? And like every year they just get better and better, because that's what happens when you grow up from like a kid into like a full-fledged champion, like Di Marco, who had another season under his belt, another brilliant year under his belt, and a real leader. And so Inter have a clear plan and a clear strategy, and players that they're just moving 1 or 2, 3, they're just adding a few. Milan has added a whole bunch of them, and then they all got injured. So it's a lot. It's really a lot to take. They've changed, there's no Maldini. There's differences when it comes to the directorship. There's differences in ownership. The stuff takes time, and I just ask for a little bit of patience. I'm not saying that Pioli will definitely get this right, in which case, by all means, make your judgments and see what happens. But I just feel like this is so ridiculous. Like, this is a guy that won a Scudetto. This is the guy that, and one that no one thought that they should have won it. It should have been Inter's that season as well. And on top of it, he reached the Champions League semi-final and pulled it out of the bag against Napoli, against Luciano Spalletti's Napoli. And so I'm like, Jesus Christ, it's like 11 games in and you're like, this is ridiculous. And they're in third, So, but I do want to ask you about Arrigo Sacchi because, I have problems with him. He was saying that, he finds it hard sometimes not to criticize Leao. And I feel like Capello walks a tightrope as well, because it's like he really wants to dig in and sometimes then says, but, I know he's brilliant. If you're Milan, you want to keep Leao for those moments, but then doesn't it just get really frustrating watching him day in and day out not show what he's capable of? And there's just this part of you that's like, I almost want you to go and I can rely on someone who's less brilliant than you, but maybe more consistent. Or is this guy ever going to live up to his potential is my question.
I think there will come a time when he isn't there anymore. I think he's not there forever. But I think that right now, with the squad they have, while I share your frustrations with him, because you see him do things like this and you think, why aren't we here more? I think you take him out of this team and the ceiling of what they can do is a lot lower immediately. And that's, a hard pill to swallow, because take a player like Christian Pulisic, because we've been talking about him. I think I'm more enthusiastic about him than you are, Mina, or at least I certainly was when he came in. And I like Pulisic, but Pulisic is never going to be as good as Leao can be. So Pulisic might give you more consistency. Pulisic might give you more application. Pulisic might be a player you feel like you know he's going to do his job more than with Leao, but he's never going to be brilliant in the same way. He's going to be good, but he's not going to be brilliant. And I think that is such a hard thing to replace in a team, that you end up sort of trapped in an impossible situation, right? Because you do need Leao to keep developing, to become the best player he can be, if you want to really take that next step. But if you take him out of this mix, I don't think the team's better, because he's got a level that he can go to that the rest of the team can't.
Okay, here's a question. Would you say Kvaratskhelia is more consistent?
Tricky. I mean, Kvaratskhelia was consistently not that great for the last couple of months of last season. He didn't score a goal for a few months. I'm not sure. I think they're sort of, it
Which
feels in my head a bit like comparing apples and oranges.
Yes, that's true. But who would you take if you were Milan?
Yeah, who would I take? Depends on the team you're building, but I think I'm still inclined to say Kvaratskhelia.
Okay.
They're different. They're really different because what they do is different. I think Leao is more direct, more the player who you ask to make that last run in behind, whereas Kvaratskhelia, I think, brings more to the connectivity of your team. Yeah. Even though they're both dribblers, even though they both have some similarities, I think Kvaratskhelia connects your team more, and I think if I'm building a team, I'm more inclined to that than I am to what Leao does.
Well, the two goals were fantastic. The second goal being, in the words of Corriere dello Sport, made in France, Vive la France, with Leao crossing it for Giroud, who continues to show us just how important he is for the side. It's so nice to juxtaposition that against sort of Kylian Mbappe, who just looked like he lost the will to live after a while, in the sense that, where you see somebody who is a grinder, like somebody who was always going to work really hard in Giroud, and someone like Mbappe, who after a while, when it's not going well for him, you saw him a little bit switch off, I think.
It's a great mirror to Leao in some ways. I mean, Mbappe, obviously, again, we talk about high ceilings. Mbappe's ceiling is the highest of all, right? Mbappe showed us in a World Cup final that when he wants to be the best player on the planet, he'll go a very long way towards it. But Mbappe doesn't always give you everything that he should. And it felt, definitely, I agree with you, like this was a game where he didn't give everything he could.
I wonder if this is just something that we now have to expect from players. I don't know. This is, I guess, what makes Bellingham stand apart, because he gives you everything. And I don't know whether it's a club mentality where you just end up in Real Madrid and you just die for them. Whereas when you play for any other club, it doesn't seem to be the same mentality. But
Mbappe doesn't want to be there. That's the awkward part we have to acknowledge, isn't it? He wanted to leave this summer, so...
Wants to leave every summer and then ends up staying.
Yes.
I wonder whether also being in San Siro, and I feel like the crowd was just amazing. The choreography was freaking fantastic by the looks of it. But okay, let me ask you this. Who is going to qualify out of this group? Will Milan make it?
I mean, this was obviously a huge win for Milan. I think what sort of the sort of biggest part of it is that it's put destiny I suppose it's kept it in their hands because they always had the chance to win this game, but it's very much put destiny in their own hands, right? If they now beat Borussia Dortmund at home, beat Newcastle away, they will go through. But neither of those is a foregone conclusion. I'd said before this game that I thought Milan were having quite a perplexing group because I thought they were the better team at home to Newcastle and they were the better team away to Borussia Dortmund, but they drew those two games and then they were dreadful away to PSG and suddenly they were bottom of the group. So if I go on overall performances through the group, I think they should be good enough to beat Borussia Dortmund at home. And then Newcastle away is a question of whether or not they can handle the atmosphere and the environment, because to some extent, every team in this group has shown that it's much better at home than away from home. PSG have won 2 at home and lost 2 away. Dortmund have taken 4 points at home. Milan have taken 4 points at home. Newcastle have got the worst home record, but they still won 1 out of 2. So the away game at the end of the group could yet trip them up, but they have to beat Dortmund now at home. I mean, that goes without saying, but they have to do it. And the thing that is the wild card for Milan, as it was before this game, is can you score the goals? Because they didn't for 3 games, and then they scored an absolutely brilliant one with Leao. But you have to score the goals.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly showed us that they knew how to defend, which is something that I was unsure about because I do see them as being defensively vulnerable at the back, even though they've actually pulled out some good defensive performances this season. But I was really impressed with this one. They've only scored 2 goals obviously so far in their 4 matches. They are on 5 points. Newcastle's on 4. Paris Saint-Germain's on 6, and Dortmund, the team that everyone thought would finish dead last in this group, is actually topping it. I feel like they read what everyone was saying and they just put it up in the dressing room. It's like, we're going to show them, I honestly don't know how.
What if it's just like the whole group is like rock, paper, scissors, like Dortmund couldn't beat anyone, but then they beat Newcastle twice,
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. It's crazy, but it is very important that Milan win their next match. And maybe by then PSG would have defeated Newcastle. And then it's not such a huge deal when it comes to them going to St. James's Park. Hopefully they will be going through. One team that has already gone through is their city rivals in Inter. Here's a question. You've watched a lot of the matches. And if you haven't watched all the matches, then you've watched obviously all of the highlights. Is Inter the second best team so far? I mean, I actually think they're probably the best team so far. I think City's still ahead, I think. But what do you think of the way that they've been playing?
Yeah, I was going to say I've watched all of Inter's matches in the Champions League. I haven't watched all of the games in the Champions League. And I think clearly Manchester City are favourites to win this competition again, as they should be. Real Madrid have taken maximum points from their games. Bayern Munich have taken maximum points from their games. So there are some teams that are also running very hot. And actually, even within Inter's groups, I think Real Sociedad have looked really good in their Champions League games.
Yes.
But what I really have been sort of impressed by with this Inter team is just kind of how just totally normal it looks, because Inter are not actually a team that have a strong recent history of cruising through every group stage, right? It's been an ordeal getting back into the Champions League. And then, yes, last season they were brilliant, went all the way to the final. But these passages through the groups have often been a challenge or times a failed challenge in the last decade. And it just looked completely straightforward that they should get 10 points after 4 games. Yes, Salzburg played a decent game last night, and it wasn't inevitable that Inter were going to win the game, but it is felt inevitable to me all the way through this group that Inter were going to qualify from the group. And the fact that they did it with 2 games to spare almost felt like not a big deal. It was like, yes, this is who Inter are again now. They are a team that belongs in that category of the top teams in Europe, and the top teams in Europe do this. They get through their groups and they crack on with the next round.
I find it amazing because obviously last year they had a horrible group in which they had Bayern as well as Barcelona, and they came out of it, and it was sort of their performances in the Champions League that made us believe in Inter, because their performances in the league were very dodgy, especially away from home. They were conceding lots of goals. True. And then you saw them in the Champions League and you're like, wow, this is a really good team. Like, why are they not showing this in Serie A? Whereas this time around, because of the way that the team is and the fact that they don't have, I mean, Benfica's just been horrendous for them. So they feel like they don't even need to start Lautaro Martinez. And I think that is, where they can actually somewhat change some of the players. They obviously have the squad depth to allow for it. But I also feel like they're not sort of giving their all in the Champions League because they can afford not to. So they can concentrate actually on both fronts where they can lead and be this mighty, powerful Inter in Serie A, and also have the feeling that they don't need to be that necessarily in the Champions League because they are so above and beyond. There's question mark that, well, the question is whether that defeat to Man City has changed them from being Pazza Inter to a more consistent Inter, because now they have that belief in their system. Is it that, or is it Lautaro Martinez? I mean, we have to go back to this conversation, but right now, this guy is on another level. Like, he's just fantastic to watch. And it's like, I don't know, it's like this is the Superman version of him, because this is the best I've ever seen from him. And I think that right now, he is the best. Obviously, he is certainly the best striker in Serie A, but he deserves to be mentioned amongst the very best. And you were the first to talk about that this season. And it's Lautaro Martinez. Like, take him out of the team. Are they going to be this machine that they are now?
Well, you said it. They dared to start this game without him, and they started this game without Di Marco as well, giving Carlos Augusto another start at left wing back. They gave Bisek, I think, his first senior start. He had a couple of variants off the bench in Serie A. So they were very confident in the way they approached this game, making those changes. And yes, it was Lautaro who comes off the bench and wins the game. But actually, I mean, I'm sorry to change direction, because I could completely agree with you and could repeat again that I think Lautaro is up to another level right now. But I think there's one or two others in this team that maybe we haven't talked about as much. And in particular, I actually really want to just mention how good I think Çalhanoğlu's been this season. And Çalhanoğlu, when he signed, he gave it this big talk about how he didn't see why he shouldn't be mentioned among the very best players in the world at his position. And I think a lot of people sort of looked at that and thought, come on, mate, like you're getting a little bit big for your boots over there, aren't you? But this season, I think he's playing that central role for Inter as well as anyone in Serie A is. I mean, his pass percentage in Serie A is something like the 7th or so best success rate of his passes in all the division. And the difference is when you look at where Çalhanoğlu is making those passes, everyone else who's ahead of him in terms of just percentage of passes made is basically either a centre-back or a defensive midfielder who's making short little backwards passes in front of their own area that are very low risk. Whereas he's not that, right? He's making passes up the pitch. He's making passes that sometimes are high risk, and he's still showing that really high accuracy. And it's so important to how the team ticks together. And of course, that's not all about Çalhanoğlu, right? You're able to make successful passes because the team around you is working. You're able to make successful passes because you have Lautaro and Thuram making these intelligent runs and creating space and doing all of that. But I do really want to sort of highlight Çalhanoğlu, because I've been thinking that for the last week or so. We really haven't talked enough about how good he's been. I think he's been really good this season. And I think that in a greater sense, he is emblematic of what I think about this team in general, as is Lautaro, frankly, which is, yeah, maybe it's the Pazza Inter thing, but one way or another, I just feel like Inter going to that Champions League final last season has given them a sense of being like self-possessed, of knowing how good they can be, of like, yeah, okay, actually it's not a surprise to us anymore. We think we're this good. And coaches talk about that all the time in every sport, right? That winning mentality. When you get used to winning, you actually start to believe it. And I think Inter just believe it at the moment. They're like, yeah, we are this good. We can mix it with anyone, and we expect to go through our Champions League group in quick time.
Yeah, I do. I sort of wonder whether or not, like, because here's the thing, like, you're right to mention Çalhanoğlu, because I think that he has been sort of spoken about as the best midfielder currently in Serie A just because of his performances and what he has been doing. And it's interesting because if you told me that this is, how they were going to perform without Brozovic was my favorite midfielder in Serie A. And I would just think that any team without Brozovic would lose something. But Çalhanoğlu, ever since he started playing him, I feel like it reminds me a bit of like Pirlo in midfield for Juventus. And then he started to be replaced by Claudio Marchisio. And it actually worked really well because he was just more dynamic and Pirlo is Pirlo, right? But it still worked for Juventus. And I just see that Çalhanoğlu's come in and he's taken so well to just being this leader. And I wonder whether sometimes with players is that they have it in them, but they need the right environment to show you that. And I don't know whether in Milan it just sort of, maybe his character just wasn't allowed to, I guess, grow in the way that he feels very comfortable into sort of being this leader, sort of, because I don't see like a massive character in Inter. I think they're all big, but I feel like there can be sometimes a disparity in the sense that Ibra is so much bigger than everyone in Milan, right? So maybe I don't know if that is something, but I just kind of feel like it's kind of like a nice, almost working class mentality in Inter where everyone's on the same level. It's like a socialist type of team, and they just really like egg each other on. Like Barella's brilliant when he comes on, Di Marco has been like a champion. And then you look even at the back, like Bastoni, it's just brilliance all over the pitch. So there isn't this one guy that they all lean on to do something special, because sometimes it's Marcos Thuram or sometimes it's Lautaro Martinez. But it is how hard they work for the team as well. Like Lautaro Martinez, who, if he can't score a goal, then will do everything possible to ensure that a goal is scored. And I'm really amazed by their growth. I guess I should have seen it coming. And yet there's still this part of me that thinks it's very possible that they throw it away at some point. Do you have that?
I don't know. I think at the moment I have a lot of faith in this team. I think, look, they've qualified and that's the most important thing by a million miles. But I think they still need to now go ahead and follow through and win the group and beat Sociedad and make sure they finish top to make sure that second round draw looks a bit more favourable. But right now I think they're playing well enough to hang around with everyone. Seasons are long, things change, but I really like the football they're playing at the moment.
Okay, so for them, they're probably going to win Serie A, right?
Yeah. Oh, for me, they're already looking very comfortable as the favourites to win Serie A. But the other team that could upset them isn't even playing in the Champions League, and that's why they might be able to upset them.
Where's your money, Nikki? Is it on Juve or is it on Inter for Serie A?
No. If I was betting, my betting would be on Inter. But I think the Juventus are interesting. I really enjoyed your voice note and the comments on Szczesny and his 89 minutes of not quite right. But the Juventus are Juventusing, I think is the way to put it, or at least Allegriing at the moment, and they're winning games and it's always been by the cortomuso, but if you don't concede goals and they're really not conceding goals, then you're going to be a hard team to get past. And I'm certainly looking forward to the first Derby d'Italia, which comes up right after the international break at the end of this month.
Yeah, it's like real quality versus real just hard work. It's, oh my God, it's Messi versus Ronaldo. No, I'm joking. Ronaldo's so much better than this poor Juve side. Okay, speaking of teams that are going for top four and trying to make a splash, obviously last year's champions in Napoli had a strange start to the season. Lots of pressure on Rudi Garcia to get the best out of this team, obviously without Victor Osimhen, as we all know. Come into this match against a team that was on a 12 loss streak. So Union Berlin has lost 12 games in a row. I actually really love this team, largely because even when they are losing, the fans continue to chant the name chant their name, chant the name of the players, ensure that they are completely encouraging their coach. And I've never seen anything like it. I just love that the team is so grateful for the opportunities that they have to go to the Champions League to watch this team. And I just love that about them. Anyway, they managed to get a goal because Napoli being Napoli just no longer defensively secure. Counter-attack, awful goal to concede. Napoli should have won this 1-0, but they didn't. It doesn't really matter because they're probably going to go through anyway, so it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But I just feel like every time they have a performance like this, it chips away at what Rudy Garcia is trying to build, and question marks continue to be asked. Is what's going on with this team? Is it, some moments they're brilliant and some moments are they just back to being almost Pazza Napoli now that Inter is secure? Now it's Pazza Napoli.
Yeah, you say they should go through it, and they should, because the worst case scenario for them is that then in the final game at home to Braga, they'll have to avoid defeat. That's the worst case scenario. That only happens if they lose to Madrid, or at least fail to beat Madrid, which is likely. But then also if Braga get the home win over Union Berlin. Now, both those things are actually more likely than not. But even in that situation, you still get Napoli go to the last game knowing that a draw is enough for them. So they're very much in control of their destiny, but it's a little bit more hairy than it might have been. Just to say, first of all, Union Berlin are a bit of a mystery to me because I haven't watched them in the Bundesliga. I've seen their Champions League games this season, so that's my frame of reference. And in the Champions League, they've been competitive, right? They lost by a single goal to Real Madrid in the start of the group. They were on course for a result against Braga until the 3rd minute of injury time of their game. They had more shots than Napoli in the first meeting when it was in Germany. So it's a mystery to me how this team had gone 11 games always losing. Like, I would have thought a team that can do all that at some point would have run into someone they could beat. That seems surprising. Sorry, was it 12? Sorry.
Yeah.
So I think they have deserved something in this Champions League campaign. I think it's they've done enough to earn a point somewhere along the line, and frankly, they could have pinched all 3 points in this game at the end. Napoli, I mean, it's exactly as you say, Mina. And look at the numbers. Napoli had 73% of possession. They had plenty of shots on target. They did have a goal disallowed, which I think lots of Arsenal fans were watching and thinking, isn't that exactly what Newcastle did against Arsenal on the weekend? Interesting how rules are applied differently, but I agree with the decision to disallow it. I think it was the right decision. The thing is, Napoli had all that possession. They took 27 shots in the game, only scored once. I mean, it's a bit oversimplifying to talk about 27 shots and scoring once, but that is an extraordinary disparity. Normally, when you take that many shots, you do expect to score more than once. But the thing is, they managed to give up 15 shots as well to a team that only had 27% of possession. And you can't be that reckless, especially when you're already 1-0 up, and expect to never be punished for it. They allowed the counterattacks all evening. They never stopped allowing them right to the end of the game. And it just feels like there isn't... it feels the same as it has all season to me with Rudy Garcia. It feels like there isn't some unifying idea holding things together at the moment. There's just good footballers doing good stuff. And that won't be enough in the Champions League. It might get you through the group, but it's not going to get you that far without a better, more coherent system.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like even if it goes to the last match in the game, in the group, I don't believe in Braga at all. But I do have a fear of Napoli just in how they're going to perform this season, because I actually think they're almost exceeding my expectations at the moment, because I think it could really fall apart for them, because I agree with you. I do. Osimhen obviously can come back, but in many ways, Raspadori has allowed them to sort of convey some idea in the way that they're playing. But I do feel that this team is exactly that. It is reliant on individual moments of magic, on hopefully one of these players doing something special. And I don't see that unifying idea. So my question is that should Rudy Garcia keep his job? And I think it's unfair to talk about this because it's so new. But when the team has changed that drastically from what we saw last season, and I don't know if it is drastic because the matches are not that bad, but they haven't won a home match since the end of September. We're at November 9th. Like it's a big deal that like at home there hasn't been the performances that they should be getting in the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona. And I just feel like I expect this team to show us something, a little bit more of what we saw last season. And
I don't see a coach that right now could get that out of them, because if it's Antonio Conte they're going to, then I mean, I just think that you might as well just sell your whole team at this point, you know. He's just, you can't go from Spalletti to Conte. It just doesn't make sense to me, you know. So I don't know which coach. I would actually go for a super attacking coach. They should have gone for Italiano. I would have loved to have seen him in that role. But meanwhile, Maurizio Sarri managed the 1-0 victory against Feyenoord, who were the better team, let's be honest. This was just, it's amazing because they had 35% possession and 1 shot on target. I feel like it's the most Allegri win ever, but it's Maurizio Sarri. So Lazio again managed to get this win. It's a little bit of what happened last season, because Lazio played Feyenoord then, and each team won the home game. This was about sort of, you know, Feyenoord. I really enjoy watching them. Actually, they're a pretty good team to watch. Lots of, you know, combinations on the wing, very dynamic, quick rotations of the ball, but not enough incisiveness up front to have made the difference. Meanwhile, I don't know what to make of this team, Lazio. I mean, they've already got 5 losses in 11 games in Serie A. We can see that Ciro Immobile is not of the levels that we're used to when it comes to him. Tati Castellanos is perhaps not the most efficient of strikers, even though he is fun to watch. Zaccagni hasn't been available. Obviously, there's the loss of Milinkovic-Savic to consider. When talking about this after the weekend, because they lost to Bologna 1-0, I didn't think their performance was as bad as I think a lot of the critics said it was. I think they created a lot, and that's the issue. They keep creating. They do create. They don't finish. On this occasion, it was great because they did finish and they got the 1-0. But going forward, is this your issue a lot of times with Serie A, like Milan? It's a lot of creation, not enough finishing. Is this becoming like a major problem for some teams?
It's fascinating to me because on the one hand, yes, overall, Lazio's efficiency in front of goal is not good. On the other hand, like, they're almost on course for like the most efficient Champions League group qualification possible, because they weren't good against Celtic in the first game, but they scored in the, you know, tiny bit of football they played at the end. They scored enough to get the win. Scored twice and got the win. They weren't good in, well, they weren't awful in this game, but I agree with you that Feyenoord were probably the better team, but Lazio scored the goal. They're managing to get the points that they maybe shouldn't. And obviously they got a draw against Atletico as well. One more win might get them through this group, and the next game is at home to Celtic, who are bottom of the group on 1 point. So they are, despite not impressing me almost at all in this group stage, they're actually navigating a not straightforward group so far quite well. So I find them a puzzle. There's definitely a sort of interesting situation now for Maurizio Sarri up front, because clearly, openly, because Claudio Lotito does not do things subtly, Lotito wanted to see Castellanos play up front, and Castellanos came in and I think has played quite well in some games. But there isn't a way so far for Sarri to combine Castellanos with Immobile, and Immobile hasn't had a great start to the season, truthfully, but he comes in this game and he reminds you what he can do, and he takes his goal very ruthlessly, even if his run back from an offside position did not impress producer Simon, who is not happy with that part of the offside rules, the ability to sort of hang out in an offside position, then just time a run to come back for the correct phase of the game. It was a ruthlessly taken goal, and within the rules as they are. So yeah, really sort of interesting dilemma, I think, for Sarri going forward for these last couple of games, who does start up front. But who knows, maybe getting dropped for a minute has helped Immobile refocus, and maybe we'll get one of those scoring runs that we know he's very, very capable of.
Do you think? So, massive game over the weekend in which Roma had conceded a goal to Lecce and then came back to score twice in stoppage time to turn it all around. Obviously, at the start of the match, Romelu Lukaku missed his first penalty after 14 perfectly taken penalties. And Mourinho said, thankfully, that he got the goal that would allow him to sleep well at night, because that was just such an entertaining match, which is not something I usually say about Roma games or Juventus games, actually. But in general, I also don't know what to make of this Roma side, because last year, one thing I could depend on is that they had this really strong defense, and they would hopefully nick a goal every now and then. This time around, I don't feel that way, because actually they're better going forward almost than they are defending. Then you've got this Lazio side who know how to switch it on against, I don't know, like Napoli, but were dreadful against Juventus, dreadful against Milan. And yes, 5 losses in 11 matches is a big deal. It's a big deal. And yet I still think it's going to be them that win over the weekend, because obviously it's the Derby della Capitale, and I'm sorry, and I know producer Simon is a huge Roma fan. And Roma will have Dybala because he's going to be rested for Slavia Prague. I think it's important to note that Sarri was asked about this, and he was saying that he's really angry about the way that things are scheduled. Obviously, he always complains about the schedule in Serie A.
Sarri's always complaining about something. That's just like his default status in life. He's sometimes very endearing, Maurizio Sarri. There's things I find about him very endearing. Of course, it will forever be a wonderful story that he was working in a bank in his sort of midlife and managed to make this transition to be a manager who's won major trophies and done all these things. But sometimes he really does just sound like a grumpy old bloke at a bar, doesn't he?
Yeah, but I sort of love that about him, because I almost think that he does it I almost think he says things just to cause drama and then is above the drama. Does that make sense? Like, he just treats it as if he's so above it. But then he drops these bombs like, meanwhile, Roma are just playing a friendly midweek. And then Mourinho loses his mind because he's like, I think this is really disrespectful to Slavia Prague. And I'm like, dude, it is a friendly. Come on. And I mean, you're resting your best players. So clearly this is not the match of your life, But it is difficult because Lazio...
But Sarri would also do that as well. Sarri would just trash the Europa League game for the derby. He 100% would have done. I mean, he did it quite openly when he was in Europa League. I don't care about this. It's not the league. Yeah. So for him, I guess that really is true as well.
I'm amazed that he hasn't trashed the Champions League. I'll be honest with you. I feel like there's a part of me that's almost surprised that they're winning, because I feel like he just doesn't respect anything to do with Europe for some reason. And he said it was like a party. Like, he's like, our job is Serie A, and like, this is like a bonus, a party that we can go to and see how well we do. That is Sarri. Okay, so let me just ask you now, big match, who's going to win, Lazio or Roma? It's always a derby, so it's always fascinating.
Yeah, I think Roma is my pick, and I think it's for the boring but obvious reason that goals win games. We were just talking about Lazio's situation up front and uncertainty about who would even start up front, whereas Roma, once you have, Lukaku, whatever else he is or isn't, has been scoring goals by the bucket load since he got there. And once you've got Dybala back with him in that lineup, I just think that team's going to score. Most of the time, that's going to score at least one and maybe more. And I'm not certain that I have a lot of faith in this Lazio team to score goals at the moment.
No, possibly not. Obviously, when it comes to Champions League and Conference League, we've got Fiorentina, Atalanta, and Roma playing. We wish them all luck. I think that it's been a really good round for the Italians in the Champions League. 3 wins and 1 draw. And all of a sudden, I've gone from thinking Milan might be the worst side in Serie A to thinking they're going to win the Champions League if they can show us just a little bit more of what we've been seeing recently, or at least, no, not recently, in this one match. Let me be clear about it.
I want to throw a question back to you, Mina, because I really think there's like a scenario here that goes all the way from 1 to 4. How many Italian teams do you think will be in the knockout rounds of the Champions League?
All 4.
All 4? You think it's all 4?
Yeah. What about you? It's only Milan that's questioned, right?
I want to believe it's all 4. Well, no, Lazio aren't done yet. I mean, I think they're in a better position, but I wouldn't rule out that they could
lose to Celtic?
Draw with Celtic, but more likely lose to them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because they only won away to Celtic with Providel in the injury time. It was
Atleti.
It was a whole story. Sorry, you're right. That was Atleti the draw. No, it was Pedro scored for the winner against Celtic at the end, wasn't it? Sorry, you're right. I'm mixing the two late goal scores
also,
up.
Celtic Park is hard to go to. Like it's difficult, their stadium. Whereas at home, you would imagine Lazio could do it, right?
So I think, like, on balance, they're in a good position and should go through. But I think it's not impossible if they don't. And I think the same for Napoli. Like, Napoli definitely should go through. But can I believe, look, take it one step at a time. Can I believe that they lose to Real Madrid? Yes, I expect they probably will lose to Real Madrid. So if Braga win their game, then you do at least get to the last round with things not settled yet. And do I think it's possible that this team could stuff it up? Yes. Do I think they will? Probably not. So that does put us on 3. And that makes Milan the sort of swing team at the end. And I'd like to be more confident in Milan. I think between all the different scenarios, between the slim possibilities of one of Lazio or Napoli messing up and the more sort of difficult path still facing Milan, I reckon I'm going to go with 3 out of 4. But I hope I'm wrong, and I hope it's all 4.
Which is the team? Milan are the team that miss out? 3 out
Milan
of 4.
have the toughest. Milan have the toughest path for sure, because one win isn't going to do it. Probably you've probably got to win both games unless someone does you a favour. So Milan are the ones most at risk, definitely.
One of the reasons why I'm sure about Lazio and Napoli is because I don't trust their opponents more than I. It's not that I trust them. I just don't trust their opponents, like, if that makes sense. Like, Braga concede 2 goals a game on average. In general, they concede 2 goals a game, but they score 3. I mean, they could score 2 against Napoli because Napoli's defense is just hideous, but I don't think that they have it in them to stop Napoli's attack either. So I feel confident of that. And then when I think of Lazio, I feel like Celtic has already accepted their fate at this point. You could see that with the way that, like, Atletico was just scoring goal after goal after goal. And I was like, this is really awful. But yeah, it is about Milan.
You can't even play for the Europa League anymore either. So, like, even that sort of lesser goal is gone for Celtic now.
Precisely that. And it's bizarre to me because with Milan, it's like 3 matches. I was like, this is just awful. This is just awful football. Then 1 match, and I'm like, they can do a lot. Like, this is just, look at them. Like, they're so wonderful. And so then and it's really interesting because obviously I did listen to the ESPN podcast, and they've gone from thinking Milan is the worst team to all of them now voting as that the team to get out of the group over PSG. And I'm like, okay, like that's hilarious, like, it really is this one performance that has made us sort of think to ourselves, do they have enough in them? I do want to ask you about something that I didn't ask you before. How did you feel about Donnarumma and the amount of dollars thrown in his direction? Like, I felt so sorry.
I actually thought it was sort of weirdly, like, not a bad night for him in terms of his performance. I thought he made some quite good saves in the game. I think that without him playing well, that could easily have been a more comfortable win for Milan. Even on the first goal, he actually makes a pretty decent stop to force Leao into that overhead kick. So I thought he sort of handled it all pretty well. It's completely overblown. Of course it is. It's completely overblown, sort of throwing these hundreds and thousands of paper notes down. There's sort of this tiny part of me that enjoys it because it's theatre, right? Like, it's all we're watching this sport because it's theatre, and it's sort of hilarious how melodramatic it is to be throwing down thousands and thousands of fake banknotes. It's ridiculous. On the other hand, I think there is the sort of human part of you that remembers that is still a person who actually probably does still have lots of attachments and personal connections in Milan, and maybe it's actually just not nice to deal with. But as a piece of theatre, it was incredible, and quite sort of fascinating mirror as well, with Dortmund in the same group, their fans throwing down the sort of fake gold chunks in their game. So everything was all about money in this group on Wednesday night.
I love the gold bars that they threw in Newcastle. I thought it was brilliant. Yes, it's
gold bars. And when I said gold chunks, I couldn't think of the word bars. I was like, gold chunks? It's just chunks of gold. Why not?
Chunks of gold. It looked like it was like big chunks, and in my head I'm like, does that hurt if it falls? But then obviously they're cardboard, and I'm just stupid. I was going to ask you guys if you think Vicario should now be the coach of the
goalkeeper.
I was going to ask both of you, actually. Yeah, the goalkeeper for the national team. Just to get a goal and to get a go rather instead of Donnarumma, because it's Gazzetta dello Sport ran a survey and asked, and 70% of them said that they want Vicario to replace Donnarumma, which I'm like, he was the best player of Euro 2020 and everyone's already forgotten about it. But Simon's nodding.
Vicario is playing very well. I would give him, I think he at least deserves a chance. Whether or not he should be instantly number one, I think is we can decide that later, but I think there's no reason not to give him an opportunity.
And Simon nods, so I'm assuming that he wants Vicario to replace Donnarumma. Yes, it's a thumbs up from him.
So I think that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Sorry again that we came a little bit later in the week, but I think it was more fun because we got to have a really good conversation about the Champions League games. So I'm going to say that even though it was just completely my fault with being in New York, that actually it's all worked out for the best, in my opinion. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening and for supporting us. Special shout out and thank you to all of our Chronicles Tifosi Patreon members. And we'll be back next week. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter at Mina Rizuki, at Nikki Vandini, and at Serie A Chron Pod. You can subscribe to Serie A Chronicles on YouTube for clips and short videos of the show. And other than that, enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you next week for a roundup of the Rome derby and everything else that happens in Serie A this weekend.
Bravo!
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100. For a first deposit matchup to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.